I'm Mike Hanna with this edition of Inside Egypt as the country gets ready to choose its next leader. This is the second presidential election in as many years, with two men vying for the top spot, former Field Marshal Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and former presidential candidate Hamdine Sabahi. Egyptians living abroad have already made their pick. The latest numbers suggest more than 90% of them chose Sisi. Here's Bernard Smith with a look at how the campaigning's been going.
The clear favourite to win Egypt's presidential election says his campaign will be unconventional. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says he's relying on a campaign driven by the people. And there seems to be no shortage of volunteers signing up to promote the former Field Marshal's candidacy.
Field Marshal Sisi's campaigns are popular campaigns in the sense that the central campaigns doesn't send any support, doesn't send posters or anything. The support comes from the people. You find a person bringing T-shirts, for example. The people are the ones that act. Elections this time are popular elections.
With Sisi's victory in the election seemingly all but guaranteed, the election campaign is perhaps less charged than in countries where the outcome isn't so predictable. So far, Sisi has limited himself to television interviews rather than big rallies. But there is some competition. Hamdine Sabahi is the only other candidate. From the left of Egyptian politics, he has enthusiastic supporters. Sabahi has done this before. He came third in the 2012 election that was won by Mohamed Morsi, who's since been deposed.
If our war against poverty is the holy war, then I am running in this election hoping that God makes me victorious. And I know that my easy battle is that I become victorious and win the elections. However, my harder battle will be that I beat poverty.
Critics of last year's military coup fear Sabahi's participation gives legitimacy to an event many see as political theatre. But in what campaigning there is, both candidates are focusing on the economy. Understandable, as previous presidents Mohamed Morsi and Hosni Mubarak can link their downfalls partly to a failure to tackle poverty and joblessness. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
Well, as mentioned in that package, the clear frontrunner is former Field Marshal Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who as head of the military and claiming popular support, led the coup against Mohamed Morsi. He's been vague on his policies, but has promised to transform the economy with ambitious plans for things like housing and unemployment. Sisi has the support of the military, many of Egypt's big businessmen, and almost all of the country's media.
I ask all Egyptians, especially women, who can prove their deep sense of patriotism by going to vote. I also want to ask the young people to participate, regardless of who you want to vote for. I want all Egyptian men and women to know, irrespective of their religion or ideology, that there is something we should all share, and that is our love for Egypt and our protection for Egypt.
Well, his challenger is Hamdine Sabahi, who ran for president in the 2012 elections. He came in third place. Sabahi has campaigned hard on issues of social justice and promised more state intervention in the economy. It's a message that's gone down well with some young voters, many of whom favour a civilian candidate over a military one.
We must eradicate poverty and dictatorship to make our country a beacon of livelihood, freedom and social justice. I respect all and every opinion, with or against me. The answer is in our hands. May God help us to find the right solution to restore prosperity, justice, love and tolerance. I will not allow any discrimination on the basis of religious or political affiliation. I'm certain of Egyptians' will to coexist. Corruption has bred discrimination.
For more on this, we're joined by our three guests. Sarah El-Tantawi, Assistant Professor of Comparative Religion at Evergreen State College. She's currently a postdoctoral fellow in Berlin. Also from Berlin, Shahira Amin, Egypt contributor for Index on Censorship. She was the former deputy head of Egyptian state-owned Nile TV. And joining us here in the studio is Khalil Anani, adjunct professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University and author of The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Sarah El-Tantawi. Many appear to believe it's a foregone conclusion that el-Sisi will win this election, yet some recent polls indicate that that may not be quite as straightforward as it would appear. Your opinion?
I think that he will win the elections, but I agree with you that the recent polling doesn't bode well for a regime that thinks that they will have absolutely no opposition or any kind of oversight over their mandate. If we look at the returns of the expat community, the Egyptian expatriate community all over the world, they're very overwhelmingly in favor of Sisi with a fairly large turnout, larger than came out for example, the elections last 2 years ago. But yes, you are right that the recent polling, such as the Pew polling, shows that the favorability rating for Sisi is not as astronomically high, let's say, as one assumes by keeping kind of track of the media, especially the state-owned media. So I wouldn't want to read too much into those numbers, though, because I think that Sisi does have very wide support. I expect him to win the presidency pretty soundly, but he should not take from that there isn't an opposition and that this is just some kind of presidency in which he will not be held accountable or that there will not be any oversight, because I think Egypt has changed and that's very different.
Well, those are issues that we'll get onto in a moment, but Khalil Anani, your response to that initial question, is it a foregone conclusion?
Well, to some extent, yes. I would agree with Sarah that Sisi has very obvious popularity. However, there's also some growing opposition to him. The question is to what extent the opposition can really hold Sisi accountable when he becomes a president, which is also, there is a big doubt about this because the opposition is still in a very fragmented and divided moment right now in Egypt, and there is no much consensus among these opposition forces that they can come together and try to challenge Sisi in the future. So we might need to wait to see how this will play out in the future.
Well, Shaira Min, your view on this?
I actually don't think that the election will be free and fair or democratic. Several would-be presidential candidates have opted to stay away, describing the election as a farce. Also, with the exclusion of the Muslim Brotherhood, that was Egypt's largest opposition group under Mubarak and whose candidate won the 2012 presidential election. I think that, you know, in this climate of exclusion, in this climate of repression, there can be no free and fair election.
Well, Sarah El-Tantawi, your view on that this is not a context in which a free and fair election can happen?
I don't quite see it that way because I don't read the situation in terms of those types of ideals. I prefer to stick with the logic of what's actually happened in Egypt. And whatever we think of, I mean, I agree, of course, that the exclusion of Islamists, or the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, certainly casts a pall over the fairness of the election in the sense that you have a huge group that is not represented. But that didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, you have to look at what actually happened in Egypt. And the Muslim Brotherhood had a chance at power. They were very unpopular. They made several mistakes. They were also stymied by the deep state. And it was a complex situation that ended in a popular revolt that was followed by a popularly backed military coup. So we're dealing in a historical context here in which the Muslim Brotherhood has been tried and tested and failed in a free and fair elections context, which I think should raise questions about, I mean, I still continue to believe that we're in a revolutionary sort of overall context in Egypt and that predicting the future is very difficult to do. So what we can do is sort of follow what's happening and understand the logic of the moment. According to the logic of the moment, these elections are sort of in keeping with the internal logic of what's been happening over the last 3 years. And in that sense, there's no evidence that there is actual tampering of these actual elections such as they are. Of course, I do agree with the point that the exclusion of the Muslim Brotherhood casts a shadow and is a problem, but such as they are, but again, that's embedded in the history of the last 3 years. Well, such Khalil, as the elections are, there's not much evidence.
Well, let's go to Khalil Anani. You heard there the phrase, a popularly backed coup. To what extent will this election confirm or deny that assertion? It's very important to el-Sisi, is it not, to get first of all, majority support, and secondly, a large percentage poll.
Well, that's true. I think if you look at the recent also polls by PEW that found that Sisi has 54% of people support and 42% for Morsi. So we still have the same, division, the same polarization atmosphere that has been there for the last year. One of the main arguments that was made that for June 30, that this is an attempt to bring the country back to some sort of consensus and some sort of agreement. And what happened, that the division was deepened, the polarization has increased, and not only this, but if we look at the atmosphere since July 3rd until now, it's very different from that used to be the case over the last 3 years. You're talking about exclusion of not only the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, all types of political opposition has been silenced. Many of them have been arrested. Many of them have been, even some of them have been killed. So the atmosphere itself doesn't make us think that the future would be much better than what's happening right now.
Well, Shaira, I mean, returning to the points that you were making in your first statement, can you see this election as in any way giving some indication of a popular opinion, either in the amount of support in terms of the poll or in the amount of people who actually stay away?
I actually think that many people will boycott this vote, believing that the result is a foregone conclusion. We already see how Egyptian youth are disengaged because they're frustrated and because they're really angry that this crackdown that initially started as being a crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood supporters has expanded in recent months to also target secular activists. Many of the symbols of the January 2011 revolution are behind bars. So Sisi's popularity is dwindling and has been, particularly in recent weeks. We've seen protests at universities across the nation, daily street protests. So I really think that the fact that a sizable segment of the population is being excluded from the political process and from public life is going to make things very difficult for him should he become president.
Well, Khalil Nani, the issue of Hamdin Sabahi, the opponent in this election, now his critics have contended that he's giving the process a veracity and a legitimacy that maybe it should not enjoy, according to the critics. Yet he clearly believes that he stands a chance of winning this process, does he not?
That's true. I think he believes that he can make a difference, and he believes, genuinely, I would say, that he can win the elections as well. But if we look at the context and the atmosphere and the political propaganda that has been made over the last 10 months, anyone would say, no, this is not going to happen. See, Sabahi cannot by any means be a president. But I think Sabahi is trying to benefit from the despair and the anger and disenchantment of some segments of Egyptian youth who might be anti-brotherhood and anti-military at the same time by trying to capitalize in this. But I would say that there is no, any chance for Sabahi to become really Egypt's next president.
Well, Sarah El-Tantawi, on that particular point, Sabahi perhaps offering an avenue to those who do not want to see a general or former field marshal, as he is now called, return to power. Egyptians got rid of one a few years ago. Do you think that this is something that Sabahi is running on strongly?
Absolutely. I think that is actually the most important point. The reason why Egypt's revolution has failed so far, in my opinion, is not as much about what happened last year as because of the fact that there really is no faction in Egypt other than the military regime or the Islamists that has the capacity or the willingness to take state power. until the revolutionary groups in concert and in alliance with labor, with liberal groups, with Nasserists such as Sabahi, can form alliances, can put aside their squabbles and differences, and really kind of take it up a notch and really, I would say, increase their level of ambition for what they want to do in Egypt and in the Egyptian state, which is very clearly speaking to make themselves ready to actually assume the responsibilities of state power. Until that organizational and sort of philosophical, intellectual, spiritual moment happens with these groups, we are going to see either military rule or Muslim Brotherhood rule or Islamist rule in Egypt. And I think that fundamental logic that's been operative in Egypt for the past 80 years is a logic that a lot of regular voters in Egypt understand. And therefore, when you understand it that way, the support that Sisi does enjoy by, I mean, I understand the youth vote is very disenchanted, but that's a small percentage of the Egyptian vote. Most people who want stability, your sort of average person, is looking at these two polls, the Islamist poll, the military poll, and they're putting their faith at the moment behind Sisi, and it's logical. It's something that we can understand if you are interested in Egypt actually having a state. Because if you don't have the military regime right now, you're going to have an Islamist regime. That Islamist regime has been defeated and now is oppressed. And, you know, if somebody wants to argue for a vacuum, they can do that. But I consider that very dangerous and irresponsible.
Well, Shaira, I mean, that's a bleak prognosis that we just heard outlined there. But to what degree is there a strong current of Egyptian opinion that believes a military or a former military man will bring them stability that they have lost through this period of revolution?
I actually don't think that the military strongman Field Marshal Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is capable of bringing stability to Egypt as long as the current repressive policies continue. There has to be a radical change in policies. The brutal crackdown has to stop. Of course, there has to be inclusion and reconciliation. That is the only way that Egypt can achieve political stability. The tourists and investors have stayed away and will continue to stay away as long as there is political turmoil in the country. Jihadi groups have already vowed that they will continue their militant attacks. The protests will continue. There can be no stability without inclusion.
Well, Khalil Anani, this is a very important point because el-Sisi is actually staking a lot here. He is promising a security, he is promising forms of reform, yet many will doubt whether he can actually deliver on that, should he win.
I don't think so. I think that any elections always have high promises, but when it comes to the reality, I think it would be very difficult to deliver on this. Sisi has nothing to do but to promise that he will bring stability, but I would agree with Shahira that no stability is going to happen in Egypt without really political inclusion, not only for Islamists, but even for secular opposition that is now whether oppressed or behind the bars, it was mentioned before. Sisi is trying to capitalize in people despair also, and people lack of the sense of security that has been there over the last 3 years. But the question is that he's trying to shift the narrative from promoting democracy and the freedoms and human rights for the sake of security. So he's trying to play the same game of Mubarak, that I'm going to give you security at the expense of the freedoms, which the January 2011 revolution in the first place, was mainly for freedoms and human rights. Now he's trying to reverse the game by saying, guys, I'm going to give you security, but please wait for democracy. And he said this, explicitly, that democracy would take at least 25 years in Egypt to be applied.
Well, Sarah El-Tantawi, that would appear to play somewhat in the argument that you are advancing, that this is part of a process, a necessary part of a process, until Egyptians come together in some common whole with a joint belief in democracy as an accepted form. Would you agree?
I would, except I don't think this is an inevitable process. I don't think that, there had to be a return to military rule, but I'm a realist. I think it is what did in fact happen. And so here we are, and that's where I am with it. Now, the word democracy, it is an interesting thing. There was an experiment with democracy in terms of the military regime. When Mubarak fell, that was not the end of the military regime, as we all know. The military regime brokered the transition, sponsored the elections that saw the Muslim Brotherhood winning. I think it's quite clear that a lot of people thought that the Muslim Brotherhood had a very good chance of winning. And so there were some discussions, let's say, between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood before and during their rule about how to sort of maintain the status quo. Now, that's what we got in Egypt when we had a democratic transition in 2012. I think that the failure of that transition and the failure of Morsi's regime, which I don't totally blame on Morsi's regime, but of course some of the blame certainly does lie there. But the overall failure of it should prompt us to ask some questions about what does democracy really mean in Egypt. Obviously, it's not just a ballot box proposition, and it has, and we don't have it now with Sisi and this military regime. But I think that what the Pew poll that we've been referencing also showed is that Egyptians value a stable state over democracy at this time, because what they think democracy is what has just happened, and it failed.
Well, the issue about what democracy is a subject for another half hour at least. But Shaira Amin, coming out of what is being stated there, very importantly, the points that you made about the restrictive political and legal context of this process is actually something that the Carter Center has issued a formal statement saying. The Carter Center, having monitored all the electoral processes since the fall of Mubarak, they are sending a small monitoring team on this occasion. They say so too is the European Union, which is going to monitor the process at the invitation of the Egyptian authorities. Does that give you any hope that there will be a legitimate process, flawed as you might be arguing it is in terms of the context with which it's taking place?
Legitimate, no. And we've heard the April 6th group that has recently been outlawed for allegedly colluding with foreign powers to bring down the state. They have urged the EU to stay away from these elections, calling them illegitimate in this current climate. So I really think that the elections are very far away from being democratic because of the repressive climate and the clampdown on free expression. We currently have a very propagandist and biased press in Egypt, and in this atmosphere there can be no
very quickly,
election.
Khalil Anani, your view on that. Can there be a proper monitoring of a process regardless of how flawed?
I don't think so. I don't think that there is real access for observers that they can really monitor the elections all over the country.
Well, my thanks there to our guests, Khalil Anani, Sarah El-Tantawi and Shaira Amin. Well, we are unable to report from inside Egypt, and I'll leave you with this explanation why. This is Peter Grester, Al Jazeera's correspondent who's been held behind bars in Cairo's Tora prison since December. Mohammed Fahmy, Al Jazeera's producer who was arrested with Peter, a dual Canadian-Egyptian citizen. He's also an author. Baher Mohammed, father of two, is another one of our producers behind bars. The Al Jazeera three are falsely accused of conspiring with the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood. They will make their 10th court appearance on June the 1st. Abdallah El-Shami, Al Jazeera Arabic correspondent, has been in prison for more than 9 months without trial. The network continues to demand their unconditional release, as do all others who believe in media freedom.
Imagine a world where reality is distorted.
Imagine being kept in the dark about major global events.
Imagine being silenced when speaking out
could save your life.
I don't know where to go. We don't know where to go to get any food.
You've just imagined a world where journalists are not free to report the facts.